Hello everyone, welcome to the Adkup Show. Today we are exploring a scenario that sounds like a plot of a dystopian novel. What if the European Union collapsed? So without wasting time, let's get started. First off, the EU single market allows for free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. Disintegration would mean reintroducing national customs and regulatory barriers. In 2023, the EU's internal market contributed to around 25% of EU's GDP, and overall 60% of the EU trade is done within its borders. I know Germany is a major exporter and is dependent on the international market, but still majority EU countries are just for trade within the union border. Now, these figures are huge. The reimposition of tariffs and non-tariff barriers could reduce this by a significant margin, potentially leading to economic contraction. It will erode purchasing power of EU countries to a great extent, pushing many regions into poverty and chaos. A study by Center for Economic Policy Research estimates that a disintegration scenario could reduce EU trade by up to 10 to 20%. Smaller states like Greece, Italy, and Portugal, which are dependent on collective economic engine of EU, would suffer the most. These EU countries have high public debt levels, managed partly through EU mechanisms like the European Union Stability Mechanism. Without the support, countries like Italy or Greece might face unsustainable debt levels, forcing harsh austerity measures for defaults, as noted by International Monetary Fund's historical analysis on debt crisis. The euro's stability has been key in maintaining low inflation, interest rates, and keeping debt level managed in the eurozone area. Although we are seeing an increase in energy prices due to sanctions on Russia, an EU collapse would likely see a return to national currencies with potential hyperinflation, which will be inevitable, or deflation in some countries, as people might even prefer to save. The financial crisis in Greece from 2009 to 2015 showed how leaving the euro could lead to severe economic repercussions, including a potential 30 to 50% devaluation of new national currencies based on various economic analysis. Now, coming to political consequences, the EU has been a bastion of peace and cooperation. Its collapse would give a rise to nationalism and populism. The EU has acted as a buffer against nationalist and political tensions. Its disintegration could fuel nationalist and populist movements, as seen with Brexit or the rise of far-right parties in several EU countries. However, we are witnessing rise in right-wing politics in EU, but that's pretty much limited and related to issues of immigration and crimes committed by illegal migrants. A study by European Council on Foreign Relations in 2019 suggested that over half of Europeans believe that EU disintegration is a realistic possibility within 20 years, hinting at a deep-seated Euroscepticism. The EU harmonizes regulations in numerous fields. Its breakdown would lead to policy divergence in areas like environmental protection, where the EU has pushed for unified, ambitious targets. Countries might revert to less stringent or different standards, impacting global climate efforts. Now, coming to the most important aspect, that is security, mainstream belief is that NATO would continue to exist if EU disintegrates. Well, I'm not saying that NATO too will cease to exist, but its power will definitely reduce due to infighting, although US will continue to have a majority say in it. But it kind of looks like the US is not much interested in carrying the burden of European security framework. Ultimately, NATO might disintegrate, but many countries, especially in East Europe, would ask for security guarantees. This geopolitical vacuum might see increased external influence, particularly from Russia in Eastern Europe. Socially, the impact would be profound. The Schengen area allows for passport-free travel across much of Europe. Its dismantlement would affect millions, disrupting social ties, work opportunities, and educational exchanges. The European Commission's estimates suggest 1.3 million EU citizens live in another EU country for work, with many more for study or family reasons. Now, this industry in itself is very big, and absent of this will lead to big economic loss for many countries, especially for those countries which relies heavily on tourism and hospitality. EU funds support social programs in many regions, particularly in East Europe. The withdrawal of such support could lead to an increased poverty or social unrest. In 2022, the total expenditure on social protection benefits in the EU amounted to $4.3 trillion, which was equivalent to 26.9% of gross domestic product. Now, this is not a small figure. These are serious numbers that will have serious consequences if they get reduced. For many, the EU has crafted a new layer of identity. Its disappearance might lead to resurgence of national identities, sometimes at the cost of inclusivity and multiculturalism. Now, coming to geopolitical consequences. On the world stage, the EU collapse would be seismic. The EU's global influence would not just diminish, but would probably become history, just like the USSR, potentially leading to shift in power dynamics where the US, China, Russia, and probably even India might gain more influence in Europe. The EU's unity has been crucial in international negotiations when it comes to dealing with great powers like the US and China. Lack of unity will fracture these negotiations in every field, and this could give rise to conflict in several regions in Europe, just like how it happens in the African continent. The EU has been a stabilizing force in post-Cold War Europe. Its absence could lead to increased regional instability that will have potential of reviving old conflicts or leading to new ones. I mean, this would definitely happen, and why am I repeating this? Anyways, areas like the Balkans or Cyprus, EU membership has been a peacekeeping tool, and without its influence, these regions will go into flames. Definitely go into flames. While this scenario paints a bleak picture, it's essential to consider alternatives like EU's reforms or deeper integration. The EU, with all its flaws, has brought peace and prosperity to a continent once ravaged by wars. Before we close, remember this is a speculative analysis based on current trends and historical precedents. The EU could evolve, adapt, or even strengthen, but if it were to fall, the consequences would be vast and varied. By the way, the regions which became independent after the fall of the USSR aren't really stable. Poverty and violence is pretty much visible. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis insightful, give us a like, subscribe for more deep dives into global affairs, and share your thoughts in comments below. Until next time, keep learning and keep smiling. Peace out.